Hey guys, welcome to the channel, 247 DIY. As you can see over my shoulder here, I'm actually talking to you from the future. Vehicle's already up on jacks, I've already done some work to it, but I had to refilm my intro. The original intro I filmed just wasn't good enough. I'm still learning the filming process, I'm still learning this camera. I need better lighting in certain areas of the shop, and I need a better mic for this camera. The other video you couldn't hear what I was saying at all. So without further ado, let's introduce what we're doing. We're working on my 2012 Subaru Forester. It's a 5-speed manual transmission, about 150,000 miles on it. The input shaft bearing failed on the original transmission. I replaced it with a used transmission with 78,000 miles on it. That input shaft bearing failed, so what we're doing today is we're going to be changing out that transmission for another new one. So without any more delay, let's go ahead and get right into it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to need to do is disconnect the battery. I'm going to start here by removing the positive cable. There's a 10mm nut on there. Just going to go ahead and loosen that up. And it'll come right off. Tuck it down out of the way and go ahead and remove your negative cable. Same thing, 10mm nut here. Don't have to back it all the way off, just enough to loosen. And there we go. So next we need to go ahead and remove the air inlet here. Very simple. You have two push pins right here. You can see I'm missing one. Flathead screwdriver, twist, pull it up, comes right out. Alright, so now we need to remove this middle portion of the intake assembly that connects to the throttle body and to the air filter assembly, but you don't need to remove the entire air filter assembly. So you're going to have one push pin, one right here, Phillips said this time. Pull that out. Two 8mm hose clamps, one on the throttle body and one that connects to the air filter assembly. Pop the air filter portion off and the throttle body portion off. Then we're going to have to look over here. We're going to have to remove one vacuum line off of the intake assembly to remove it completely. Alright, so here's a better look at that vacuum line. Right here on the side of the intake box here. Just your typical spring clip. Get some pliers on there. Pull it back. Pop it right off, and we're going to remove that. Okay, so now we want to come back here. We're still in the engine bay. We're on the back side of the engine. You can see you get the throttle body here. So we're just behind that. You have these two plugs here. One of them is going to be your neutral safety switch, and the other one's going to be your reverse switch. First thing you need to do is unplug them. So you press down on these clips here with something. They'll pop right out. There you go. So those two come out. Just kind of tuck them out of the way. This is going to be the first of your actual bell housing bolts to come off. Now when you start to remove these bell housing bolts, you want to keep them organized in terms of where they came out of. They're not all going to be the same lengths, so just make sure you remember which bolt came from which area. All right, so next you're going to want to remove your pitch top mount here. The lower bolt is a nut and a bolt, so you're going to need a socket and a wrench. Pull that right out. And your upper bolt, another 14 millimeter, is just a bolt. There's a captive nut on the other side. And you can go ahead and pull your pitch stop mount right out. Once that pitch stop mount is removed, you're going to have a grounding strap here that connects to the transmission. That's just a 10 millimeter nut. Go ahead and remove that. Tuck that down where you put those connectors. Okay, so now we need to go ahead and remove your slave cylinder for the clutch. Just two 14 millimeter nuts here, bolts. There's one. And there's two. Once that's disconnected, you can just take it and kind of tuck it up here in the AC lines, just so it's out of the way. All right, so right down here in that same area where we just removed the slave cylinder, you have this grounding strap here. Instead of removing the grounding strap from the bracket, we're going to remove the bracket altogether, because that's another one of your bell housing bolts that needs to be removed. Take that out and just tuck that out of the way. Alright, so we're still working in the same area here, just a different camera angle. We're still working on the starter. The positive cable to the starter needs to come out now. It's a 12 millimeter nut on this. This is a nut and a washer, so don't drop that little washer or else you're going to be hunting for it. Pull your positive cable off, tuck it out of the way. I like to throw the hardware back on there again just so you can't lose it. Alright, so one of the last things we're going to do here in the engine bay before we lift the vehicle, there's one more bolt you can get to. It's back over here where we removed the bracket for the reverse switch and the neutral safety, just a little bit lower on the passenger side here. And once again, this is a 14 millimeter bolt. And set that aside with the other ones. All right, next we need to get the vehicle in the air, so we're going to go ahead and lift it up and get it on jack stands. All right, so now you need to remove some lines out of the way. You're gonna have your ABS line right here, and here on the other side, a little hard to see, is gonna be your brake hose. We're gonna do a lot of movement with this knuckle and everything. Give yourself a little extra room. You've got 3 12mm bolts to remove. Those two are gonna free up your ABS line. And the one over here is gonna free up your brake hose. Okay, so next we're gonna remove our 2 strut mount bolts here. Some people do recommend that you can do what we're trying to accomplish here by removing the lower ball joint. But if you live in any area where there's lots of snow and subsequently road salt, it's unrealistic to get that lower ball joint off. So you're gonna remove these 2 strut bolts. Now you need to remember that your upper strut bolt here is the camber bolt for your alignment. And you want things to go back the way they came off. So grab a paint pen and just mark onto the strut body a line for that bolt so you can put it back in the same way that it came out. And these are 19mm bolts, 19mm nuts. And washers. Sorry, just a washer on the top. Bottom bolt usually comes right out. Top bolt will need a little persuasion. This is a 32mm axle nut, and it holds the end of your CV shaft, and it's a staked nut, but if you have a decent impact, you don't have to worry about it. Just zip it right off of there. Now remember, these are meant to be a one-time use, so once these are off, toss them. It's kind of unfortunate. These are brand new, but I have new ones, and we'll throw new ones on there. So by doing all that, what we've done is we've given ourselves enough room where we can move the inside of the CV shaft to help us get our axles out. A little bit of wrestling involved here because it's just enough room. You don't want to pull too much on that brake hose. You have enough room, but you want to avoid it. But eventually you'll get that out and you'll have it loose enough where we can move on to the next step. So now from underneath the vehicle, these CV ends here are held in with a snap ring. So you want to take a pry bar and you want to get up in there. And you need to be forceful when you pry on this, but keep in mind that the transmission case is aluminum, so you don't want to go ham on this and break anything, but you're just going to use your pry bar until you feel a snap. And your axle is going to come out. And if you're like me and get ahead of yourself and forget to drain the transmission fluid's going to come out. So we're going to go ahead and get that drained. Slip it right out of the transmission. And out she comes. Next up, what we need to do is we need to remove this, not really in the frame here, this secondary cat pipe. It's going to be between your resonated pipe in the back and between your manifold. There's going to be 3 bolts here. Now, I've replaced mine both with aftermarket units because the catalytic converters had failed. So my hardware is a bit different than the factory. I believe, and don't quote me on this, that the factory hardware is still 14 millimeter, but the factory manifold has welded on studs. So you're just going to be removing nuts. In my case, it's nuts and bolts. If you're working with the original hardware here, chances are this is going to be so rusty and corroded that it's going to snap. So do yourself a favor and get some replacements to go ahead of time. There we go. And finally, you're going to have one more 14 millimeter bolt on the center section of this pipe we're taking out on this hanger mount. And that should loosen everything up for you so you can get this pipe out of here. Take her right out. Alright, so now we're going to work our way back to the rear of the vehicle. You can see here we've got our rear diff, so this is where we are in orientation in the rear of the vehicle. We're going to be removing the rear resonator pipe, and we're going to remove it attached to the mufflers. It's pretty easy to do it this way. And you don't have to buy new gaskets. So get one of these tools. Very, very handy. For this, it'll be your best friend. But you're going to remove this hanger here. Like that. And it will drop, so just be aware of that. So now you're going to move back to the mufflers here. Obviously these aren't stock mufflers. Yours are going to look a little bit different. But you're going to have 2 of the same rubber mounts like we just removed. One over here and one up front over here. So same thing with our tool here. Remove that hanger. And then the entire rear portion of the exhaust here can be taken out as one piece. Next we have to remove this heat shield so we can get access to the drive shaft.
Simply held on by 4 12mm bolts. Now we need to remove the rear of the drive shaft here. There's 4 bolts holding it in. 12mm nuts with captive bolts, so you only need a wrench. What we're going to do, you can see I have 2 facing down right now. I'm going to remove these 2. We're going to go up top. We're going to release the handbrake. We're going to rotate the drive shaft so that these top 2 are facing down. Reset the handbrake, then come back down and remove those 2. So once you have those bolts out, this is safe to leave like this. This flange here actually indexed slightly into the circular flange of the differential here. So it'll stay put as long as you're not going too crazy. Alright, so the last step here, before we get the drive shaft out, you're going to need to remove these 2 bolts for the carrier bearing here. You can kind of support it with your knee while you take care of these bolts. Keep in mind when you bring this down, the end of the drive shaft, there's nothing fancy to it. It simply slots right into the transmission. So you just slide her right out. Support it and bring it out. Alright, so next we're going to go ahead and remove the starter. You need to remove this wire here off the bottom. There's nothing fancy to it, it just pulls off. There we go. And that'll just pull off. Tuck her out of the way. And then you have one of your bell housing bolts here, 14mm. And your starter. Alright, so I just gave that a couple whacks with my dead blow hammer. And without breaking the camera, that'll come right out. But what I like to do next is remove my 2 shifter linkages. We're going to be working with 12mm nuts and bolts here. Your lower one, right here, is just a 12mm nut. It's bolted onto a stud, you'll see in a second. So that nut will come off, and there's a big washer too. There we go. And then your top linkage here, you're gonna have a 12mm nut here on the bottom, and a 12mm nut for a bolt on the top. Then you can remove that bolt, set it aside. Your upper linkage to separate from the actual gear selector on your transmission. Now what we're going to want to do before we get too much further is we need to support the engine for when the transmission comes off. On a Subaru transmission, there's just two left and right motor mounts. So once that transmission comes off, it's going to want to rock forward, and you need to keep it in the position it's in for lining the transmission up when it goes back on. One easy way to do that is to take a soft piece, 3/4 inch wood, and you're just going to hammer it between the oil pan and the subframe. Now we can go ahead and remove the remainder of the bell housing bolts. You can see here we have a bolt up top and a nut on the bottom, and this is mirrored on the exact other side, so I'm not going to film that. Now, this is the style jack I'm going to be using for this project. This is the one from Harbor Freight, and in order to make this fit between the transmission cradle and the subframe, you do have to trim some off. I forget exactly how much I trimmed off, but if you see here, we're right up against the mechanism. So we're maybe forward from that, I don't know, 1/4 inch, and then I trimmed the corners and then came all the way back as far as I could bring it, and this will give you enough clearance. So before we get any further, we're going to need to go ahead and support the transmission, because once we take this cradle off, there's going to be nothing left holding it on. So using a 1/2 inch ratchet, you're going to lift up your jack into place. You want to throw your strap up over top. Now when you do throw your strap up over top, make sure you're going underneath the wires, because once you ratchet this down, you don't want to pinch and damage those wires. There we go. All right, so now we're going to remove this transmission cradle. On the front here, we have two 17mm bolts. And the wrists are going to be 14mm. We've got two 14mm nuts here. This secures the cradle to the transmission mount. And then you have 4 total bolts on the rear portion of the cradle. Remove all 4 of those. Your cradle is going to come down. And you're just going to start wiggling best you can, wiggling and pulling towards the rear of the vehicle. one thing I've found that can help is once you wiggle, you're gonna be going up, down, left, right, and eventually you're just gonna get frustrated. If you find that you've gotten a gap here between your, where am I looking, right here, between your engine block and your bell housing, what you can do, you want to be gentle here, you want to be careful, because you need to remember that your engine block and your bell housing are both aluminum, but you can utilize a pry bar again gently to slide that transmission backwards off of. There's 2 dowel pins about halfway up, and then there's those 2 bolt studs at the bottom. You see there, we're off the dowel studs now, and now it's cake from here. Slides out of. What are we hung up on? We're going to go right on that jacking plate that's underneath there that we used originally. And we're going to lift this up off the jack stands. And now we're just temporarily going to remove this jack stand. And we're going to bring the transmission over. Now in order to get underneath this control arm here, looks like we're going to need a couple more inches. And that'll do it. We're going to bring it right out. I've taken the gear selector, I put it in neutral, and I'll get you a little closer here so that you might be able to hear this. But if you listen, again, I'm not quite sure if you can hear that, but it's a bit of a gravelly sound. As that turns, that should be next to silent on a healthy transmission. We're going to go ahead and just strip this down to the parts we're going to need for the new transmission. So the first thing we're going to do is we need to take this throw bearing off here. There's 2 spring clips on either side. They're relatively easy. You just pull up on the left one, and you pull down on the right one. Don't forget the orientation of those. Your throw-out bearing will come right off. Then you want your clutch fork off. It's just on a little ball joint. Pop that off, pull it through, don't lose your spring clips. And the other thing I want to do, just to avoid some headache, yes, this is your, I don't know which one's which, but you have your neutral safety switch and you have your reverse switch here. These only have 100,000 on them. I'm still going to swap it out for the ones original to the vehicle.
just because I know they're working, and I don't want any headaches when it goes back in trying to figure out why the car's not running. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and pull these off. All right, with the proper 19mm wrench, you can go ahead and get these off of here. I like to loosen them first, then come through and undo your connections. You got one up here on the pitch stop mount, one about midway here, another one here. So we'll go ahead and pull these out. Another thing we want to go ahead and pull off this old transmission is this joint. I threw a new one on. And since it's real nice, I'd like to reuse it. So you need to get this dowel pin out of here. And it's a 2-piece dowel pin. There's an inner and an outer. So you want to get the inner going first. Kind of get the edge of your punch on there. Get that down through there. Once that inner portion's out, you can go ahead and start getting this outer portion out. It's a bit stubborn, but I use the back of my punch here to get it flush. Once it's flush, you can come and get on the edge of it, start working it down. And then that outer portion will come out. I've seen people say you can reuse these, but they're pretty cheap. So anytime I do this, I just go ahead and order new ones. And then that'll come right off. We're gonna reuse this. We're also gonna wanna go ahead and take this engine mount off. I don't believe the other transmission came with one, but even if it did, this one's new. So we're gonna go ahead and get that off of there. And it's 4 14mm nuts holding that on there, or sorry, bolts. I keep saying nuts. Holding that on there. The last thing I'm going to pull off of here is this bracketry here. It is the stud for your lower shifter arm linkage, as well as the hanger for that center portion of exhaust we removed earlier. So with that, the transmission's out of the vehicle. Not too tough. Keep in mind, if your transmission's never been out before and you have a lot of mileage, it's gonna go a lot more difficult than this one. All my bolts have anti-seize on them. They've all been taken out previously, so this all went pretty straightforward. But we're gonna take the new used transmission that I got, and we're gonna take the parts I just stripped off of this one, we're gonna throw them onto the other one, and we're gonna get it installed back in the vehicle. Right now though, I really need some lunch. I'm starving. My camera could use a charge up on the batteries. A few other things could use some charging. So I think this is going to be just a part one. I'll release this one and I'll keep plugging along once everything's charged, and I'll release part two which will be the install and the reassembly. So before I let you go, I just want to thank everybody who happened to be watching this. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope this helps somebody out. My reason for doing this is the forums on the internet are kind of dead. I've been a big forum guy, but there's not a lot of people using them anymore. I think because we've all kind of switched to videography, posting stuff up on YouTube. So make sure you like the video. Go ahead and subscribe if you like this content. There's going to be other fantastic content coming for you guys. Not just automotive. I'm going to do an official intro to the channel. I'm super excited to have gotten this underway. I'm glad I started this. And yeah, I'll see you guys another time. Thanks. Bye.